Good evening. My name is John Bisson. I'm not Jim O'Connell. I don't have an Irish accent, and you're probably wondering why I'm here. I moved to Manchester in 1995 and have raised my family here, and I have three children in public schools. I've known Jim O'Connell and his family for probably the past 15 years, and I and a bunch of other folks encouraged him to take a leap into serving the city of Manchester in a broader way than he already has. And he has decided to run for school board. In particular, the two open at-large seats on the Manchester School Board. Both of those seats are open. There are 6 candidates running, and I'm proud to announce that Jim O'Connell, my good friend, is one of them. He and his wife Kathy have raised 4 beautiful children in the Manchester Public Schools, and as many of you know, he is a tireless advocate for public schools. And the city of Manchester could ask for no one more qualified or capable to fill those positions. So that's why I'm here. And Jim is going to start talking, which he does very well.
Thank you, John, for those kind words. I appreciate it. So the analogy would be, a lot of people are uncomfortable having their photograph taken. Probably most people that I know, there's only a small number of people who want to step out to the front when they're having their photograph taken. Usually are people like, let me stand one bit behind or back or whatever else. And I'm used to being on here and folks here every week, and so I'm not shy. But
No.
my point is that your kind words I'm very grateful for them, and I thank you for them. I thank you for your support, and I'm very excited to be running. I've had some very generous words and thoughts shared with me in recent days, and I'm still assessing it, or dealing with it, because normally when you walk around the street, people don't come up to you and say, you're great or you're wonderful or whatever else, and I can see how beguiling that might become if one left it. I'm only at this 3 days, and I'm thinking, but anyway, but thank you, and I have been. I was approached by a number of people, and as you know, for years. I've sat and talked and encouraged, and I've been involved in the schools when I was doing fundraising and helping out in various ways, and it was never my ambition to run for public office. It wasn't my thought. I didn't set out at the beginning of this 15 years ago or 10 years ago in my advocacy with Citizens for Manchester Schools or the other things with the idea that if I keep doing this, one day I'm going to run for office. And so, but I was, as time has proceeded, I was less convinced that the best thing for me was to to do some back-end phone calls, talk to aldermen and school board members and the mayor on the backside, and sometimes in public, sometimes not so much, and that would be the effective way of making change. And I came to the conclusion, with the encouragement of people such as yourself, but I came to the conclusion that this idea that time is of the essence, right? That sort of delay is, our schools really there are big decisions need to be taken. We need to see improvement, and we can't abandon a generation or even a few years. Tom Brennan, God rest him, or now 3 times ago, 3 superintendents ago, he said to me once, and he was talking about my children. I had a daughter or son in 7th grade at the time, and he was newly back in the district, and he had taken over as the superintendent, and he was here maybe about 6 months at a time. And in a moment of candor, and I'm not saying he wasn't candid all the time, but in this moment he said to me, I have to tell you, Jim, he said, there's nothing I can do for 7th and 8th grade. This current 7th and 8th grade, there's nothing I can do. They're going to be failed by us. And to hear that coming from the mouth of a superintendent, I didn't take it badly. I didn't damn him for it. I actually thought it was praiseworthy that he would have the courage to kind of say those things and be so self-aware and aware of the position he had and who he was responsible for. That he realized that after eliminating lots of programs and teachers, more than should have ever have been eliminated. That was the period at which we eliminated foreign languages from middle schools. I don't know if we're the only school district, or we were the only school district at that time, or for those next 5 years, without foreign language in middle schools. But if not, then there might have been one other, but I couldn't find them. None of the surrounding districts around Manchester. And that was just one of the 7th and 8th grade problems. So you have a kid in 7th and 8th grade, they don't have. So gladly and happily, we have put a postage stamp on that, and we've put a half a world language teacher into each middle school. So we have two Spanish teachers, each of whom drives between two middle schools to teach kids. And with that background, it seemed to me, and I still persisted with this idea that we'll keep working on it, and we'll reach this nadir point and we'll start getting better. And now, as my kids are aging out of the system, because 3 of my 4 children have now graduated, I have a son who is a rising senior at Central High School, and I can't just stand by and watch some other group of kids being abandoned. And those are strong words, but that's what a superintendent said about a set of classes in our schools. So I think it's time for me to step up and, with all humility, and not thinking that I've got all the answers and I'm arriving in some white knight on a horse going, let me solve Manchester's problems for you because, I've got a big fat head, which I might have, but a big fat head and my brain is so huge. Because I know people like this. I meet people all the time who give me it's like the Wizard of Oz. They have the great answer from on high, that they've been hiding on some street in Manchester all their lives and they've worked as a whatever and now they can solve the problems of Manchester schools. So I don't take that view, but I also, realistically, having spent the amount of time that I've spent in the schools, talking with teachers, talking with parents, talking to students, talking to administrators and principals, and now multiple superintendents, etc. I don't know, what quantity might mean, but I certainly have a great quantity of knowledge, and so. When I look at the position being open and saying, who's the best person to be there, and I was able to, I think, subjectively and objectively come to the conclusion that I was the best one.
So no one's going to quarrel with the fact that you have the information and the knowledge and the experience. The question I have is, why now? Why 2019? Particularly when your youngest child is about to leave the public schools. A lot of folks would take the position that it's no longer my problem. My kids and they're all wonderful, wonderful young adults doing very well. They have done well in our public schools.
Right. But
why fight the battle for somebody else's kids?
Well, thank you, John. So that's just sort of who I am. I love libraries, for instance. Now, for some reason, I don't visit the Manchester City Library that often because I'm busy doing other things, but I've always liked libraries. And when I go to, so even though I haven't been in the Manchester City Library, I'm sorry to say, perhaps once in the last 6 months, if the Manchester City Library was in, for instance, when the city 2-3 years ago put in the air conditioning system into the library so it would be a comfortable place for people to be. The fact that I don't go there all the time, I'm a great believer in, living in a city and having the things that a city ought to have and that all citizens need to have. Likewise, I was incensed, and I brought it up on this program and talked about it when the West Side Library was reduced down to 2 days a week at one point. I think about the Cashin Centre. I might be close enough to getting to, qualify. I'm not sure what age you have to be in the Cashin Centre. It could be 55, and then I'm well qualified. But the Cashin Centre over on the west side, where a facility for the elderly or older people or senior citizens, if there was a question in Manchester about it needed a new bathrooms or there was a problem with the ceiling or an access ramp was needed, I would pay for it. if some politician were to come to my door and say, I'm going to make sure we don't spend another dime on putting a ramp in for wheelchairs at the Cashin Centre, I would run them from the door. So that's part of the answer, is sort of who I am. So regardless of whether I had kids in the system or not, to me, I live in the city of Manchester, and so I want it to be right. From a self-serving point of view, and this is not my rationale, but from the self-serving point of view, and it should be noted by people listening. By the way, the call-in number is 640-3091. If you're watching on Tuesday at just after 6 o'clock, 6:09, 6:10, then you're watching live, and the call-in number is 640-3091. I'd be happy to hear from you positively, negatively, or anything else. Where was I? I got lost in my thing for a minute. So the whole idea of just it being for me, it's for the self-serving part is that property values are tightly bound to our schools. You can ask anybody in the city of Manchester, any unbiased person, ask any real estate agent in Manchester, and you ask them what about the issue with Manchester property prices. And there is an issue with it, and the issue is that families don't want to move here. So we have a booming city with lots of great things going on. For the first time in decades, perhaps, we have some high-rise cranes in various corners of the city, and we see businesses like CMC and Southern New Hampshire University and other private companies actually putting their hands in their pockets and putting hundreds of millions of dollars into properties in Manchester. And so despite all that activity, on the domestic side, families do not want to move into Manchester, and I would like Manchester to be a whole, varied, a home for the rich, the poor, and everybody in between. For big families, small families, double income, no kid, 25-year-olds. Everything that makes a vibrant city vibrant. And so, if we continue to underfund our schools, which we continue to do, the least well-funded schools in the state of New Hampshire, the highest class sizes in the state of New Hampshire, and a dysfunctional school board managing them. If we continue down this path, then your property, mine, and the properties of any other people in this city watching this program are going to be undervalued from what they might be if we had good schools. So that's the self-serving piece. But that's not the answer to your question about why I'm running, because that's the self-serving piece. The real answer is I am deeply committed to the idea of education. I view education writ large, from kindergarten or pre-K all the way through university, as the single biggest lever of government, of society, that can be pulled and manipulated in order to change lives and change the quality of life and change society and to improve things. And we all know that the empirical evidence is there. We spend $1 on education, and I don't know the exact multiplier, but every dollar spent in education at a younger age saves $5 in terms of recidivism, prison, violence, social welfare programs, unemployment benefits, etc., etc., etc. So it's foolhardy as a city and as a state to be the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire, in a state that has the least well-funded public education universities, most expensive public universities in the state. So we take all of that as a one, and it's inflicting real damage to our state and in particular to our city. And so that's the reason. It's the quality of life in Manchester. It's doing the right thing by the young people we have today. It's a matter of social justice. It's a matter of fairness. There is a judge, Judge Rule, I think his name is, did a ruling on the case brought by Conval and some other towns in on the Monadnock region, and the statement was issued on June 9th, and you can Google it, and it's actually a 98-page decision, and the 98 pages are worth reading, because he visits back through the recent history of the rationales given for funding or non-funding or funding methods of our schools. And here's a man who is lucid, erudite, well able to lay out, as any judge would, lay out the terms and what he has seen. And the case is simple. It's a prima facie easy case that the state of New Hampshire is not fulfilling its own requirement, the state constitutional requirement to adequately fund education under its own measures, and its own measures are a little hairy, for want of a word. They're not exactly the most. It's not as though that the set of requirements are onerous. The state itself has lowered the difficulty of the requirements to the lowest level anyway. But even those low levels of requirements they can't meet. And so we're failing at a state level, and then and going back to the school board issue here, we have school board members in Manchester, a small subset of them, but we have some of them who also serve in Concord, and they serve on the school board in Manchester, overseeing the schools for your children and mine and all the other kids in Manchester, and they go up to Concord and they vote to continue this defunding, active defunding, actually reducing the amount of money coming to Manchester every year. They vote for that, and they're very proud of that. And some of their friends, even though we don't like to talk about it other than in the darkest corners, there are people who, when we get right to the furthest extreme of this, who are fundamentally against public education. I've listened to people, and we've actually had people at City Hall in Manchester walk in and say that public education is an unconstitutional exercise of government. Where does it say in the U.S. Constitution that we should pay for education? They ignore the fact that in the state constitution we are required to fund an adequate education. And I'm not into personal jibes because it's not who I am, but I just sometimes one has to be honest. And while I'm reminded of this, we have Victoria Sullivan, who's running for mayor in the city of Manchester. Victoria and I will differ on things. I think there are things we would agree on. We've always had reasonable conversations when we speak. But I was in the presence of Victoria up in Concord one day visiting, because I have no other function there other than to occasionally go before the State Board of Education to talk to them and say, we need to, or the State Education Committee. And it was after one such meeting, and one of the state representatives, and there were three people in the elevator, Victoria Sullivan, myself, and this gentleman who was a young state representative. And he was one of those very, libertarian, very conservative, whatever nice word you want to use for a guy who wants to defund everything. And he said to me, to Victoria and I, she was voting with him, and they had just come out of a vote that was affecting Manchester and sending less money to Manchester. And he said, you're not going to like what I have to say, but he didn't know whether he would or not. But he said, I don't believe there should be any public education. There's no function of government there. We should get out of the education business. And I said, so how would that work? And he said, well, if you've got 10 kids, then you better have enough money to, educate 10 kids. And if you can't afford it, have one kid or have no kid. And there are people, and I don't want to malign Victoria Sullivan on that, but it's not as though she jumped out of her skin and said, that's not how I was thinking when I voted to defund. So we have those people. We have people on our school board who have said that they don't feel that they have a fiduciary obligation to the young people of Manchester, or to the public school young people of Manchester. We've one school board member who said publicly this past year at a meeting that, in his view, he wasn't on the school board to represent the school children and parents of the public schools of Manchester. Explicitly. That was not what he was there for. He didn't feel that he had a legal obligation to do his best every single meeting to do the right thing by the children and teachers and parents of Manchester. He said that his role was to do right by the kids who were in the schools, the kids who were homeschooled, the kids who were not schooled at all. But most importantly, his first obligation was, he said, to the taxpayers of Manchester. Well, I understand what he means by that. my issue would be with twofold with that. First of all, I think if you're going to run for the Manchester School Board, and especially once you're successful and you're on there, I think your first consideration should be that you're responsible for close to a $200 million enterprise with close to 14,500 children in the public schools, and then doing busing and providing services for another 13 or 1,400. You have an obligation to make sure that a moral obligation, I believe, to make sure that your 2,000 plus employees are being paid fairly and adequately for the work that they do. I think that's the moral obligation of any boss. When I was CEO of a company, I didn't get into conversations with employees at the end of any year or any particular time when we were reviewing people's pay and think, let me see if I can beat this guy up. Now, I know he's going through a rough time at home and he can't afford to lose the job because times are tight. I know what I'll do. I'll offer him 50 cents an hour because he can't leave anyway. And look at this. I'll be able to go back to the shareholders and say, look what I saved you. And I screwed Johnny Citizen because I was able to do it. That's not what you do as a reasonable, moral, principled human being. You ensure that your employees are adequately paid for. Now, I don't question for a minute that people, and as I will have if I have the privilege and honour of being elected to the school board in Manchester, I absolutely understand that there's an obligation, just like the obligation of a board member in a company the first obligation is to ensure the integrity of the organisation and the value for the shareholders. But I just take a larger view of the value of the shareholders, rather than the narrow view that some people would take of this tax. I'm here to look after the taxpayers. I'm looking after the taxpayers by ensuring that their children have the opportunity to have an adequate education in well-funded schools that are well-built, well-maintained, with well-qualified teachers who are going to school in an environment that lends itself to learning, etc. And that, because that in the end would not just the selfish piece about improving people's property values, which is a very mercenary sort of thing, but it truly makes Manchester a better place to live and a better place for all of us, and we end up with a better society. And as people sort of in throwaway language say, we've got to look after these kids because these are the people who are going to look after us when we're old. Well, it's a kind of simplistic thing, but there's great truth in that too. I mean, our next generations that. So I've been long-winded in my answer. I'm known for this sometimes, but I like to be also comprehensive. I am going to attempt, I have to tell you, that a number of things, if I'm elected to the school board, I'm known as somebody who is passionate about things, and so sometimes that passion shows through, and because I feel strongly about things. But I intend, though, to go on the school board, if elected, to sort of play nicely in the sandbox. I'm interested in actually making change. I'm interested in seeing things move forward. If that requires some compromise from time to time, then begrudgingly we'll find. And in the end, my measure will be, are we improving schools for the kids in Manchester?
So I have a question right along that line. You said that the school board is dysfunctional, and
yes.
You're not the first person to have said that. I think I've said that. I've attended a number of school board meetings where people during the public comments say to the board members, to their face, you all need to learn how to get along. Right. You need to start advocating for the children, a lot of the things that you just said. So let's assume that the premise of the question is the board is dysfunctional. Okay. They don't have to agree, but let's assume that. How are you going to fix it?
So I don't know if I have a fix, like the guy who's going to pull it out of his pocket, but here's my solution. So I don't have a fix. I think that without wanting to go down that revenue too far, I think there is now going to be a change in personnel on that board, which is going to improve it. And I'll just leave that sort of where it is right now. But I think that whether whatever view one takes of things. Some people are maybe just firebrands or are sort of attract, disruption and stuff. And so I expect some of that to change. But ultimately, I don't expect the board to suddenly become a well-oiled, beautiful working machine. I think there's a number of practical things. First of all, my thought is that the board should be an executive board. It's there, like the board of a company, to represent the public interest. They're not. We don't elect. If people shouldn't be electing me to the school board as an education expert. I don't have a degree in education management. I haven't run a school district. I'm not a superintendent of schools. I don't have a master's degree in child development. I'm not. So I'll be trying to push that realization to other members of the board. There are people go on to the school board in Manchester, and I'm presuming in other towns too, who set themselves up as mini experts on education. They have great and deeply held views from their big fat heads again of things that they suddenly know. They understand. They have one child and who they love dearly and who they've watched. Go from a brand new baby to somebody, squeaking for the first time, giggling for the first time, crawling for the first time, walking for the first time, talking for the first time, and that's a unique path for every human being. And if you've done it successfully for one child, I think you deserve great credit. Every parent, great. It's wonderful. And the love people have for their children, very admirable. The idea that you can extrapolate that one unique experience with that one unique human being that you've raised, and suddenly, without training, without study, you're going to take that and you're going to apply it to a very diverse 15,000 kids is a nonsense. I know when I go on the school board, if I am elected, that there are people in that room who know more than I do. I think it's simplistic, but it's important. My job will not be to, advise the director of student services about her or his role. Now, I'm there to ask questions, but I'm not going to be there second guessing. My idea is you give people the role, just like the CEO of a company, and then that's the person who gets measured. So an important thing would be the metrics of the district. How are we doing? Are we improving? Are we not? What are the goals we set? Are we meeting those goals? That's the true role of the school board. And of course, ultimately, it's policy and not the micromanagement. So to be more simple in my answer to you, the first thing I would try to do is strip out the micromanagement, discourage it. That's one. The second thing I would like to do is the meetings are way too long. And so I'm going to try in the back room before the meeting starts to encourage people, including the mayor. I'm going to encourage the mayor to use her gavel way more than she does. And I'm going to ask people and challenge them to come to the meeting prepared, having read their briefs. We see one or two school board members who have quite the stack of papers, at every meeting. Well, whatever stack of papers you have, go read them. And if you have questions, you have at least 2 weeks between meetings, and you have subcommittee meetings, and there's a telephone, and there's email, and there's personal visits if you want. Go ask the administration the answer. Why are you taking up time at the meeting on a Monday night asking questions that you should know the answer to? I listened under the same heading of the meetings going on too long. I talk to principals and administrators and teachers all the time. Sometimes when you're in the audience, you'll hear the gasps from the teachers there, and you'll hear them. 4 teachers from whatever school it might be, Bakersville or Smith Road or Green Acres, and there are 3 or 4 of them there, and some school board member is saying something that's just not controversial, just untrue. They're just inaccurate. They know not that of which they speak. And you hear the teachers going, that's not right. That doesn't happen. We don't do that. We fixed that 2 years ago. And we still have this pontificating person. And so that was going to happen sometimes. We all will fall from grace and make an error. But when it's going on all night, so come to the meetings prepared. I'll be pushing people, and as one person sitting around the table, if I'm there, I'm going to be raising objections when a person gets to their 4th and 5th comment. I'm all for open I believe in shining a bright light on things. I believe there should be open conversation. I'm all for that. It's not about shutting free speech down. But don't come in here as some half-prepared amateur who isn't really doing the right thing by the board, who's wasting the time with the administration and the public, who's actually misleading people and causing damage to our school district because of the ignorance of their position, or willful ignorance sometimes. Just stop. Come here, having read your brief. If you don't understand something that's in it, ask it prior to the meeting. There may be a time once in a great while when you don't have time that last moment of the day and you need to do it. But as a general rule, you should be coming into that meeting. There are 30 resolutions, and you should pretty much know where you stand on each one. And perhaps an explanatory question is needed on one or two. But I'd like to see it be an executive session. Because I said to Tom Brennan in particular, I've said it to all our superintendents. I said it to Mrs. Livingston. I said it to Dr. Vargas. We have these people come before us. Dr. Vargas with $165,000 a year employee, one of the most expensive employees in the city, hugely qualified, doing amazing, lots of work, without the help he needs. And he has meetings up to yin yang. He has, like I said, 2,500 employees, 15,000 students, almost 22 buildings, some 22 campuses, 22 schools, some of them with multiple buildings. All of that's on his plate. And after working a hard day and getting up at 5 a.m. to see if the weather's all right to call a snow day, he's up at 5 a.m. and they still want him at City Hall at midnight to ask him now about it's a nonsense. So too much. The meetings need to be stripped down in time. They need to be more concise. The opposite of what I often am. But I commit to you, the people, and to you, John, as somebody who has encouraged me to run, that I will go to the meetings prepared. Prepared to take the decisions and not pontificating or opinionating or editorializing other than what is absolutely necessary. So to reiterate, have the meetings be an executive session and come prepared. And then just trying to be collegial and not allowing people to sort of ramble on. I mean, if the mayor won't do it, then we're all co-equals around in the board of mayor and all in the board of school committee. We're all co-equals. We're a body of one. If I were to be elected, and so everybody is equal. Despite what one will see with one's eyes and hear with one's ears some weeks, it's a body of equals. And so as one of the equals, I'll be offering, the thought that we've probably spent enough time on this. We need to move on and get on with the people's business. I'd like to say one other thing that's tangential to that, but not directly about the functionality of the board. But part of my rationale for running and what I want to do once I'm there. I'm very conscious of the passage of time. This idea that time is of the essence. Somebody has said, that in the final analysis, as one gets older in life, and certainly when one is elderly, one discovers at some point along that path that the only true scarce resource is time. Now, there are lots of scarce resources. It's the nature of economics, but time is the one thing that is, in the end, you cannot buy more of, etc. So, when it comes to the school board more generally and the children in Manchester schools today, I'm very conscious of time. Back to the abandoning 7th and 8th grade, or we will improve our schools for a generation to come, or we're making incremental change. I'm not happy with that. And while I want to be reasonable and I want to do things that are achievable, I'm very conscious that the Manchester School Board has a 2-year term. And so that's 24 months. And the first 2 months is sort of a honeymoon period. Not to be conceited, I think it might be, for me, I've been watching for a long time, been involved for a long time. Maybe I can narrow that a little bit. But in the end, it's 2 months before people feel comfortable in their seats. At the end of the 24-month period, the last 2 months, at least, you're a lame duck board because others have been elected, you're waiting for them to come in and you're tidying up business. So now you've taken, because this is old math, 4 from 24 leaves 20. So you've got 20 months. And now you have July and August each year where the boards are stripped down to there's no meeting this month, for instance, and even though they're trying to have there was at the start of the month, but there are efforts afoot to try and have a school board meeting this month or early next month. But generally speaking, July and August are idle. And so now that's another two Julys and 2 Augusts. And so you're down to 16 months. if I go into a school board meeting and just float, just laissez-faire, let's just not do anything big this week, then I've lost 1/16 of the opportunity. And not just I've lost it, the kids that I represent, the people who've put their faith in me to run on their behalf and represent them and be their voice for their children on the Manchester School Board, I'll have let them down. If I go to a meeting, even if I'm fully prepared, but if I go to a meeting and I don't move the ball somewhat forward, and if I could expand on that, I guess, people who know me know that I like to use analogies because I think they're often, Jesus did it with parables, so I'm probably following in a good path, right?
So you're like Jesus now.
Well, I don't go around wearing my Catholicism or Christianity on my sleeve, and it's not what I lead with, but I am somebody who is faith based, and so this idea of the analogy, I think about Dickensian London, and the idea of Oliver Twist. Everybody, no matter what one knows about literature or Dickensian London or Victorian London, almost everybody recognises the image of the poor boy in the poorhouse in London with the bowl of soup saying more, and because he's got this watery gruel. And I'm getting somewhere with this, folks. So I think the important, I never want to be the guy in the black, tall silk hat, think sort of Abe Lincoln, sitting in a boardroom somewhere in Victorian London, probably a good person who went to church and is righteous and believes he's doing the right thing and wants to do the right things by the poor street waifs in the city. And he's on the board of the poorhouse. If you're on that board over a period of 2 years and the nature of conversations are, or at the end of it you're able to say, I got them to add an extra carrot into the gruel. It was chopped up into 20 pieces, so all the kids got one piece. But, I got the carrot, and then we ordered a little extra coal so the fire wasn't that cold. The rooms weren't fully freezing in the wintertime. That's not what I want to be in Manchester. In Manchester. Sorry, I missed an incoming call. I apologise, Brendan. If you call or if you want to call in again, I just noticed you out of the corner. I was in full flight. I noticed you out of the corner of my eyes. So please call in. I'd be happy. So the point is, at the end of the 2-year period, you either were the guy who made incremental change. When someone says, maybe it's a kid of mine says, Dad, weren't you on the school board in 2019 and 2020? And like how did that? How did you allow that to happen? How come we had I read somewhere we have the largest class sizes in the state. I read we don't have alternative programs. I read that we've got special ed children who don't get the services they need. I read we don't have speech pathologists. Imagine this conversation in 2030. I want to be able to defend myself. At least I want to say. Back to the analogy with Dickens, I want to say every time the issue came up with carrots, I said, to hell with the carrots and the extra carrots and the gruel. We need to change the way in which we're keeping the kids in these poorhouses in 1870s London. And the same thing goes for the school board in Manchester. It is inexcusable that in the great state of New Hampshire, in the Queen City of Manchester, the largest city in the state, with its history and now with its ambition and its dreams for its future, that we accept not just mediocrity, not just we don't have the best, not just, we're doing kind of okay. We're like the frog being boiled in oil. We're accepting now, and many people listening to us have accepted that we've got the least well-funded schools in the state, the biggest class sizes in the state, and we're not going to do anything about it. Well, I'm going on the school board to do something about it. Not to be disruptive. I'm not going to use, vigor and screaming and shouting. Well, vigor I might use. But I am very aware of the passage of time. The time is of the essence. I want to see change to our schools. I want to see kids with better opportunities in better funded schools, better run schools, better managed schools in the 2 years that I am there. Right.
So I have a question that this is going to give you an opportunity to be concise and direct.
Okay.
Because I'm going to ask you something that requires you to pick one thing and not expound for a
Okay.
long time. So, what is the biggest priority for the Manchester School Board in 2020? So I want one thing. What is it?
The biggest priority for the Manchester School District is to do something about class sizes in the city of Manchester,
And why is that?
because there's a direct correlation between the number of kids in the class and the quality of the education that kids get. Now, it is true that that's presuming you have highly qualified teachers, but our class sizes are too. I talked to a lady the other day who's sending her child to another school district or to a private school because kindergarten is too large in Manchester. And I want to talk about the real class sizes, not the pretend class sizes. I know that we have one of our schools right now. This is sort of hot off the press and not on the press at all, but we already have classes above 30 across a whole grade in our middle schools, because that's where they are right now before we have other kids come in. And so it's just no longer acceptable that we have class sizes of this size. I understand, when we have band, we've got very large class sizes. When you do art or whatever, you may have larger class sizes. Not because I want to denigrate those subjects, but just by their nature. If you're coaching football, you don't have a class of 10, right? So but when there are kids who are in need of services, one teacher with 35 kids teaching 7th grade math, it just isn't a practical. Kids need they need personal intervention. They need the personal touch, and we should be able to do that. There's no reason why we can't improve. If the governor had not vetoed the budget that he did 3 weeks ago, that was $19 million additionally coming to Manchester in fiscal 2021. And ladies and gentlemen, people should be on the phone calling Governor Sununu and asking him asking their representatives to override the veto, but asking the Chris Sununu to have to have another look at this, because $19 million, that represents, if we spent it on teachers, which we wouldn't, I'm sure, spend it on, but if we did, that's 400 teachers. And we would transform the nature of education in the city tomorrow. I'm not saying that's the only thing one needs. We need. I was in Belmont today, and the library in Belmont is a 1.5 room. It's a room with a desk in the middle of it and 2 side wings. It's a small town, beautiful little town, but it's a small town. And I was waiting for somebody, and I picked up the school report for the town of. And it's a combined district with some other Gilmanton, Belmont. 2 others, but their total population is something around 1,200 or 1,300 kids across the 3 elementary, middle, and whatever else. And I didn't spend a big study on it. I just picked up their 2018-19 report, was sitting there, and they were talking about their achievement. One of their achievements was that they have a computer for every kid. And that's something that they had set out to do 3 years ago, and now every kid in every class has got a dedicated computer for themselves. They come to school, their laptop or their whatever it is, their computer is sitting there for them. This is Gilmanton and Belmont, and while they're beautiful places, these are not especially expensive towns. These are very, maybe even impoverished, but certainly not expensive towns, and yet we don't even have that aspiration, or if we have it as an aspiration, it's just barely an aspiration and nothing more. So class sizes isn't the only thing, but I would start there and see if we can the number of kids who in those large classes. What happens is the top 10 or 20% are fine. The kids with mom and dad at home, or or whatever it is, whether it's mom and dad, but a stable family environment, and without others, detractions and etc. And distractions too. that top 20% or whatever the exact number is does fine. The kids who don't have an adult in their life, or don't have a mentor in their lives, or don't have somebody to help them, they lean heavily on and need a teacher in the classroom. And we should be able to do that, especially when we get to the lower grades. We should be able to do that, and that's one of the things that I'll be pushing during my 2 years. Amongst I can tell you my three things. There are
but
three
ask
things.
For the biggest. So now you can go to the next two.
That's the biggest. So the biggest is class size. The other thing is the fact that we've got the lowest funded per capita funding in the state. I'm a taxpayer in the city of Manchester. I don't want to pay more taxes. But I do want to. There's a need for our schools to be adequately funded, and that will need pressure at the state level in order to undo some of the cuts that have happened already. But certainly, at the minimum, to stop the ongoing cuts that are planned out through the next number of budget cycles in the state of New Hampshire. And it also means, wisely managing the funds that we have, and making sure that we look at every source for revenue that we have. I would love to be in a conversation around the school board with people of differing political views, different economic views, and that we could agree that having the least well-funded school system in the state is unacceptable to all of us. And if we could set that as a level set, we could then have a conversation about how do we fund it. How do we improve the nature of that? And part of that, of course, is people will say efficiencies. And of course, we want government to be efficient, and we want our money to be well spent and properly managed. But I've listened to 15 years or more in Manchester of people saying that the only answer is we need to better manage the money we have. And that's why we increasingly have less money than everybody else to spend. And so part of the solution will be to recognize that we're the least well-funded school system in the state, and then do something about that. And then thirdly is the issue about governance. And insofar as the school board is a hindrance to the future of education in Manchester and is a distraction and is discouraging, we have teachers in Manchester. I'm told that last week we had 90 open positions in the city of Manchester. Now, a lot of it has to do with the contract issue and the fact that people can go down the street and go to another school district and earn $10,000 or $15,000 more. For years, I remember having a conversation with Alderman Joe Kelly Levasseur once when he, and in fairness to him, I corrected him, and he took the correction because he's a big guy and he can take it. His point was, if they didn't like it, they could go someplace else, and how come they're not going down? How come we don't have teachers going down the street to go someplace else? And I called him the following day after he said that. This is about three years ago, and I said, Joe, you probably don't know this, but we do have people going down the street, and if you want the numbers about the number of teachers who have left our district, I can get them for you. And I'm talking about retirements, and about people who've chosen to go elsewhere. And he wasn't aware of that at that time. Now, we've moved beyond there to the point where we now have a significant issue with teachers leaving the Manchester School District, which is a first in my experience. We have 90 open positions as of last week, and principals, many of whom are on vacation because they're missing around these weeks right now. They're all back in school the end of the first week of August. The teachers are, or the principals are, but they're receiving resignation letters this week. So it isn't just we've got 90 and we're at 90. It's unlikely there'll be a huge number after this time because other school districts have already hired everybody they want to hire. But it's a really significant issue, and in the absence of the settlement of the teachers' contract, this is only going to get worse. And this goes right back to the school board and the school board's inability to resolve the issue before them. The alderman found an extra $2.5 million to put into the and they're very pleased with themselves that they have taken this massive step after teachers and workers in the Manchester School District being without a contract for 3 out of the last 4, now near 3 out of the last 6, soon to be 4 out of the last 7. And as I pointed out in this program recently, yes, we should all be grateful that that some additional money was found from various sources in order to help to fund a contract for the teachers. But it represents, as I've said here, it represents $1,000 a year per teacher, which is $20 a week, and that's 50 cents an hour. And so after, if you worked at BAE Systems, which is coming into the south end of the city, or if you were over at Edgewater Technologies or any place else in the city, or whatever, you're working at SNU, and you had been out of contract and no steps, and this had gone on for 3 out of the last 6 years, and at the end of it all, a knockdown, drag-out battle, they said, here's 50 cents an hour. The problem is there's a significant number of people on our school board who think that that's acceptable. And they do it only because they look and they say, well, they never look at what's fair, what's right, what's equitable, what the system needs, what we actually really need. They simply insist on this number. We have a red line drawn that we're not going to cross. And the red line is causing real problems to the city of Manchester, to our schools, to our teachers, and therefore to our children, and as a result to us.
So let's talk about teachers.
Yes.
So you just said the issue with the contract.
Yeah.
My understanding is the principals are also having a contract issue. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if they're having I don't know if they're having a contract issue. They're having an issue in the sense that they don't have a contract.
Right.
I mean, the words contract issue could imply that there's a significant dispute about a particular item. I don't know that.
But they're out of contract.
Actually, yeah. So all 5 groups are out of contract. So the secretaries are out of contract. The paraprofessionals are out of contract. The teachers are out of contract, and the principals are out of contract. So all 5 groups are out of contract right now.
So what does the school board do to fix that problem? How do you fix the teacher contract problem, having watched the shenanigans that went on over the past year or two,
right,
with the theatrics of let's have this process or that process, and then some people didn't show up and they were accused of all kinds of nasty thing on both sides. Mm-hmm. How do you fix that?
Well, it's not going to be easy because there's distrust there on both sides, and it's very hard to have what are ultimately difficult conversations when people don't trust each other. But the first thing, and I don't want to point the finger at in one particular place or something, but because I'm not talking about one, I'm talking about a group, but epitomized by 1 or 2. If I'm negotiating something with you, and I come in here and I want to discuss, I'm going to lease a property from you. I own a restaurant, it's up for renewal, and you want to increase my lease by 10%. I think it's only worth 5%. I don't want to close my restaurant, and I won't put up the price of my hamburgers. You want adequately to be funded for your property that you own. But I'm out on the street before the meeting saying, he's a greedy capitalist pig. He has more money than God. He's shafting me because he doesn't like me. And then I walk into the meeting to kind of have a conversation with you. So in this case, we have school board members who are on social media and in public talking about teachers are greedy, that teachers are educrats. I can't even think of some of the derogatory words that have been used about them. And I don't understand then how that person can expect to walk into a room to talk with people who are looking to, take a paycheck home to pay their mortgage and their car payment, to put food on the table and fund their children's clothing. And you have all that rhetoric, and you expect there to be a reasonable conversation. So I will pull people up on those conversations. Just the same way as I would if I would speak directly to somebody on any side. If there were a teacher on a negotiating committee who was, calling everybody names and using derogatory language about them, I would pull them up and say, this is how you want to, go forward. So that needs to be eliminated, because these are tough issues. But even let me step back from that, because I said they're tough. They're not that tough issues, actually. The fact that our teachers have not had a contract for 3 out of the last 6 years is as big a shame as the fact that we've got class sizes the largest in the state, and that we have the least well-funded school system in the state. Just think about this for a minute and forget about the hyperbole and sort of the tit and tat and all that. How could it possibly be right, normal, let alone moral, that a teacher in Manchester gets paid less than a teacher in, pick your town, Wyndham, Hooksett, Auburn, wherever, Berlin, Claremont? That's not actually true, I think, but I want to be careful. I don't want to mislead people. But below the state average now, so let's put it there, and I don't want to be the precise towns, but we know that there are towns in the area that compensate teachers at a higher level than Manchester does. How is that even possible? We're not. We're the city of Manchester. This is where the airport is, or half of it, or part of it. This is where the industry is. This is where people come for nightlife, and they come for social events, and they come to have their weddings, and they come to have entertainment, and they come for conferences, and this is where people, this is the hub of business in the state. There are other places like the Portsmouth area, but the biggest economic engine in the state is right here and in the surrounding towns. So how there is something wrong when the city of Manchester can't afford to pay its teachers adequately. And when you think, and another thought is this: the people who came before us were able to do it. If Manchester, when it was going through its rough days, maybe it had a lot of rough days, but when the mills were closing and downsizing in the 1970s into the 1980s, Manchester didn't have the least well-funded schools in the state. It didn't have the biggest class sizes in the state. As it met its challenges over the years, Manchester was able to fund things adequately. It's this current generation, or the one that went immediately before us, the people who came in and said, we're going to tighten our belts, we're going to tighten some more. Hey, they're starving. I know, but we're going to tighten some more. I'm not going to spend a dime. I'm going to tighten some more. So we've done that. And there might have been some excuse in 2008 after an economic downturn. What excuse is there today? New Hampshire is the 5th or 6th most wealthy state in the Union. That surprises most people, but facts are facts. Unemployment's at 2.4%. There is no reason why Manchester should still be insisting on, we're poor. We're poor only in ambition and a willingness and a drive and an eagerness to actually solve the problem. And there's time, some new faces have to come in. I'm hoping a lot of new faces will join me if I'm elected, and we'll work to resolve these issues. We're down to about 2 minutes, I think, folks. We've managed to get ourselves all the way to here.
Wow, hard to believe.
So it is hard to believe. I just got Brendan, who looks after us and is our producer. Sorry, Paul is here. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Paul's the one who, Brendan's like really good, but Paul's the guy. Paul, whoever's here at the time is the best. There's two different. We start with Brendan, and we have Paul, who's there for the second. So Paul's the best right now for sure. So Paul has given us the heads up. We're down to about a minute. So I just have to say, John, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your great questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I humbly offer my services to you as your representative on the school board at large. I am anxious to do it. I'm up to do it. I think I'm equipped to do it. I think the one thing you will get from me is you know where I stand. I've been before you for a long time. I've done a lot of things in our school district. I have helped with fundraising. I've helped with organizing things. I've worked with young people in the city for a long time, and I haven't changed my tone or my views. I'm not beholden to anybody. Nobody's funding me. I need funding, but I'm not being funded by any particular group. I will be joining the school board if I am elected as a voice there on your behalf and on behalf of the families and children of the city of Manchester and nobody else, and the public schools of Manchester. I'd appreciate the opportunity. I think that I can do right by you, and I certainly will try my hardest. I thank you for being with us tonight, and thank John for being here. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can go on Facebook to Jim O'Connell at Large on Facebook, or we've just set up the website jimoconnellatlarge.com, which will be active tomorrow. I'd appreciate any support you can give me, or drop an email to jimoconnellatlarge@gmail.com. Thank you, folks, and we'll see you in a week. Bye-bye now.